there, and welcome to my channel, Nicole's Scrapbook Stories. I have a fun, sketch-inspired layout for you today. I'm using the beautiful Gallery 6x6 paper suite to create a double 12x12 layout. I'm actually revisiting a sketch I used last month. And I think it's so cool how one sketch can take on a complete different look just by changing out the pattern paper. Stay tuned because I'll compare the two layouts at the end of this video. I also have some ideas to help stretch your supplies and get creative with smaller paper sizes. This paper collection includes 4 sheets of each double-sided pattern papers. They're very gallery inspired, hence the name, with patterns that feel like you're stepping into an art museum or something you'd see on like the tapestries or decor of historical buildings. I've seen a lot of scrapbookers use this suite to document trips abroad, which is so inspiring. But unfortunately, I have not had a chance to see that part of the world myself yet. I went all in and purchased the full suite during last month's buy one get one 50% off sale. The full suite includes an embossing folder and 2 stamp and die bundles. And like many of Stampin' Up bundles, it includes a great mix of coordinating and standalone dies, including beautiful florals and leafy details. We'll take a closer look at some of the dies later on in the video. I really love this stamp right here. I'm not sure if I'll use it on this layout, but I definitely have plans for it soon. And finally, there are these pressed flower embellishments. They're a lot heavier than I expected. They come in 2 different sizes and pair beautifully with the vintage aesthetic of this suite. The photos I am documenting today are from the St. Dunstan's Basilica in Charlottetown, PEI. We're not in any of the photos, but for me, this layout is more about the church itself. Originally, I printed 5 photos for this layout, but I've decided to add 1 more to better suit the sketch. It's a shot of the organ inside the church. One thing I have been told when visiting architectural spaces like this is to always look up. And that stuck with me, but just look at the detail in that ceiling. Let's take a look at the sketch. This one right here. Using the same sketches more than once lets you explore new ways of approaching it, and I love how different a layout can look just by changing up the paper and details. This sketch includes a frame around 3 sides of the layout to create a full 12x24 spread. For that, I pulled the basic beige. I know, it's not white. But I think beige will complement the photos nicely and work better with this collection I'm using. I also chose Lost Lagoon 2-tone cardstock. The church has a lot of that teal blue tones in it, both inside and out, so these colors felt like the perfect fit. One thing I have to say I love about this cardstock is the option to use either the true color or the lighter side. It really feels like I'm getting more value from each sheet. So now I've got a big decision, light or dark. And I'm sorry about my camera there. It's having a bit of trouble focusing. I'm going with the lighter side for both colors on this layout. The sketch calls for 2 portrait 4x5 photos, 2 3x6 landscape photos, and 2 3x3 photos. Of course, I'm switching things up a bit to better suit my pictures, but the overall idea is still there. This paper collection is just gorgeous. I mean, look at that. You could honestly stick this in a frame and hang it as decor. The warm wood tones in my photos, especially the pews and the organ, match this pattern so well. I'm thinking of using this piece to mat the 3 larger photos. I print my photos at home, and this one here is 4x5, including the white border. Yep, look at how amazing the photos look on it. And let's see how it'll look on the photo of the organ. I printed this one slightly wider than the sketch calls for. It's 5 3/4. It's just to better capture the grand scale and detail of the organ. Since I have the space for it, why not? That's the beauty of printing photos at home. You can size them exactly how you need. The layout will look something like this for photo placement. The only person in the photo is our guide from the walking tour that morning, which actually made it really easy to work with. I didn't have to worry about where subjects were facing or making sure that we were all looking at the camera. Like I had said, the photos are more about capturing the beauty of the space and atmosphere inside the church rather than a posed moment. It gave me a bit more freedom to focus on design and flow instead of centering everything around people. But of course, I'm still shuffling the photos around more than I really need to. Now let's talk pattern paper. I am obsessed with this print. Both sides are gorgeous, and I have a feeling I'm going to be saying that a lot today. To add a touch of subtle color, I'm auditioning this pattern paper behind the smaller photos at the bottom of the layout. Only a narrow strip will peek out above and below the photos. I want it to catch the eye without overwhelming the images. The B side of that paper looks like old wall plaster, and it has such a cool texture and color variation. I'll tuck that behind this photo up here. Next, I pulled out this pattern paper. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it, but I really like it. And this one with the damask design. I'm using it to fill in this section here. I'm placing them together carefully so the design continues, creating a seamless transition. I'll do the same thing on the right side to make it look like one continuous piece. No one will ever know I am working with 6x6 papers. To fill in this gap here, I'll use another piece of the blue plaster-like paper at the top, and for one more layer to tie in the beige from the base cardstock, I'm using this pattern paper here. I'll tuck it under this section and use it again for a long strip down the left side of the layout. I really love this plan, so I'm going to go ahead and commit to it. I'll trim everything down to size and come back with measurements and next steps. I trimmed both of the basic beige cardstocks to 11 3/4 by 11.5 inches. I gutted the centers of the Lost Lagoon cardstock, so basically I just took the middle out. This is a great way to save paper for future projects. The beige strips, that textured paper, measures 3 by 6 inches. I'm placing two of them, one on top of each other, to give the appearance of a full 12-inch strip. Apologies, my camera is still having a bit of trouble focusing again. You might notice a small seam where they meet, but that doesn't really bother me. If that bothers you, don't worry, I'll show you how to camouflage it later on in the video. You may have seen me stick some tape down on my work surface. That's to keep my cardstock from sliding. Next, I'm bringing in the damask pattern paper. I have not trimmed these pieces to size yet. I wanted to get the main structure of the layout in place first, so I can determine how much I need to trim. But for now, I'll place them loosely where they'll go. To save some of this beautiful paper, I used the frame die to cut out the center. You'll only see the smallest edge once everything is assembled. So it's a great way to stretch your supplies. I used washi tape to hold the frame in place from the underside. This is probably the only time I use washi tape. Unfortunately, I could only use the frame die on the photo mat of the organ photo. The other two mats are just a bit too small. This is what the frame looks like when you cut it. There are 3 different sized frames from one piece of paper. I used the largest one for the mat on the photo. which leaves me with 2 more frames and the inside rectangle for future projects. I'm still going to gut the paper from behind the other 2 mats just to save those pieces for later use. For the blue plaster-like paper, I'm just going to make up names, all these, what I think they look like. I cut a strip at 1 by 6 inches for the right side of the layout and one at 2 1/4 by 6 for the left. Now these aren't necessarily the final visual sizes since they'll be tucked behind the layers, but that's what I started with. Now let's adjust a few things here, getting them in just the right place. I think that's about good. As for the smaller pattern strips, they're all cut to 1/4 inch tall. I have 5 of them, 2 for the top and 2 for the bottom on each side. The 5th one I cut in half to stretch across the bottom of the 2 larger photos like this, and 1 more at the bottom here too. Let's bring the 3 smaller photos back in. This time I'm placing 2 on the left side and 1 on the right. All these photos measure 2 3/4 inches tall by 3 3/4 inches wide, except for the one on the end, which is a bit smaller at 3 1/2 inches wide. I wanted to introduce some variation in size, like the sketch shows, but I couldn't reduce this photo any further without losing important details. In the open area on the right side, that's where I'm going to add my journaling. I'll cut another damask pattern in half and tuck 1 piece over on the right. I think it's going to fit the space nicely, but I may have to tweak that later on. To help enhance the small photos, I'm pulling in some cardstock for mats. My first thought was to use Lost Lagoon. It looks nice because that color is already used a lot across this page. I might want to try something different. So instead, I'm bringing in Secret Sea cardstock. Hands down, this is my favorite of the new in colors from Stampin' Up. It's a rich, deep navy that acts like a neutral and complements just about any color you pair it with. It's a lot like Night of Navy, but just a little bit more deep and saturated color. I created a double mat for the 2 photos on the left, and I really like how that looks. It makes the white photo border pop and draws the eye to the image. I also cut a mat for the picture on the right using the same cardstock to keep things cohesive. To add a little extra detail to the beige textured pattern paper, and to help define the size of my journaling box, I'm bringing in the textured notes dies. This nested die set includes 8 different rectangle sizes, all with beautiful embossed detailing around the edges. I'm using the 2nd largest one. I'll run that through my die cutting machine, and I love the subtle design it adds, and it fits beautifully in this space. Can you see that embossed detail it leaves behind? To add the same embossed detail to this narrow strip, I'm using a partial die cutting technique. I placed the die along the outer edge of the strip and secured it in with a bit of washi tape. This is where I goofed. I placed the die on the wrong side. It should be positioned so the cutting edge is on the outer edge of the paper. So do as I say, not as I do. I thought this would be easier to show on camera, but I didn't think through the result. To do a partial cut, I let one end of the die hang off the edge of the cutting plates. Since dies only cut where there's pressure, this section won't cut at all. Then I'll flip the paper around and repeat the same process on the other end to get that same detail on both sides. So while I was embossing, and I'm sorry I lost some of the close-up footage, I also worked on my journaling. First, I measured the inside of the rectangle, not including the embossing border. Then I created a text box in Word, typed out my journaling to fit within that space. I set the outline of the text box to white, printed it onto regular copy paper to see exactly where it would print on the page. Once I had that placement, I temporarily adhered my pattern paper over the same spot and I ran it through the printer again, this time using the rear feed tray. This works better since the pattern paper tends to jam in the bottom cassette drawer. Off camera, I took a bit of time to ink the edges of all the paper layers using Secret Sea ink, just to give everything a little extra dimension and help the layers stand out. I carefully trimmed the blue damask pattern to line up the designs so the seam is virtually invisible. So the sketch shows the title placed right in this open area here. I'm using the name of the church as the title. I know, creative. I'm cutting the word Dunstan's using the alphabet a la mode dies. I really appreciate the size and shape of these letters. They're skinny, so I can fit larger words in tighter spaces. And the set includes multiples of the most common used letters, which means I can usually cut everything in one quick pass. I'm cutting these letters from Secret Sea cardstock to bring in more of that deep blue color. For the rest of the title, Saint and Basilica, I'm using the mini alphabet dies and cutting them from the same pattern paper I used to match the larger photos. So that wood grain or wood effect paper. It's a very simple title, but honestly, I could never remember the name of the church. So now every time I flip through this album, I will see it. For the embellishments, my original plan was to use crosses, arched window shapes, some gold accents, which would have echoed the church's architecture elements. But I worried that too much of those same motifs, it might distract from the intricate details I was trying to highlight in the photos themselves. That reminded me of a conversation I had with some of my crafty friends. We talked about how floral embellishments for some people are a go-to and can enhance a layout without competing with the photos. So I've decided to go in that direction instead. This collection has 3 different floral pattern papers, and I'm considering fussy cutting the flowers out. Now this sheet only has 3 flowers on it, so it feels like a waste to use that one. This green floral is pretty and could definitely work. But then there's this blue floral, which I'm really leaning towards. It fits perfectly within the color scheme I've already got going on. Let's try them out. I like the green and white florals and would fill in the areas beautifully. But these blue flowers would look really nice tucked under the edges of my photos too. I'm imagining one cluster here on the left and one coming out from under this photo near the title, and then a single flower layered on this photo here to create that visual triangle. Yeah, I like the blue ones best. And don't worry, I am not going to make you sit there and watch me fussy cut these flowers. I really like the addition of the florals, but I might add some mossy meadow green here and there just to bring in a bit of contrast. To build out the clusters even more, I'm bringing in a few of the dies from the Beautiful Motifs bundle, especially this leafy die and this flourish here. This flourish only cuts partial by design, but I'm hoping that with some careful snipping, I can separate it completely and use it as a layering embellishment. So here's all the little pieces I have to work with. I did manage to snip the flourish out, and it gave me these 2 beautiful pieces. I also cut several leafy sprigs from Secret Sea cardstock, same as the flourishes. I just love how delicate they are, and the size is perfect for tucking into clusters. Then I brought in a pop of Peach Pie cardstock. This color is featured in the collection and appears in both the pattern paper that I used and the photos themselves. I cut just one leafy sprig in Peach Pie, and then I trimmed it into 3 separate pieces so I could scatter little hints of the color around each cluster. To mix in a little more greenery, I also used the Pretty Florals dies, and I cut this leafy stem here from Mossy Meadow cardstock. I'll use these to bulk up the flower groupings and help fill in any gaps. We didn't spend a long time in the church. Walking into that building truly took my breath away. The vaulted ceilings, the ornate details, the stained glass windows were absolutely stunning. Even with other visitors around, it felt so quiet, like the building itself was gently reminding us to slow down and take it all in. I really enjoy and appreciate all those details. I can't even imagine how much time went into creating this historic masterpiece. So that morning on our walking tour, our guide also pointed out the statue across the street from the basilica. We learned that both men in the statue were named John Hambleton Gray, and they each played important roles in Canadian Confederation. That little bit of history really stuck with me, and that's pretty much what I wrote about in the journaling for this layout. Back to embellishing. I'm adding a small flourish to each cluster, tucking it just slightly under the edge of the photo. The peach pie leaves were a bit bright, so I'm using the same sponge dauber I had used earlier to ink the edges of the paper layers. I just lightly dabbed some leftover ink onto the leaves without re-inking. That softened them up perfectly. I also decided to move this cluster up above the landscape photo instead. There's more open space there, and I felt like it balanced the layout a little better. To attach everything, I'm using a combination of Barely Art liquid glue and my go-to tape runner. I really like the Easy Runner by Scrapbook adhesives. It is permanent, but repositionable for a short time, which is perfect for someone like me who sometimes changes their mind. Starting with the base layers in each cluster, I'm using small dots of glue to hold things in place. You really don't need much. You can always add more later if something lifts, but I prefer to start with less in case you want to adjust anything after the fact. I am mainly using the liquid glue for the smaller pieces and tape runner where I can. You might remember me mentioning that small seam in the beige pattern paper strip. Well, this is the perfect time to address it. By extending the leafy sprigs or building out this embellishment cluster, you can easily cover that seam. Like I said earlier, it doesn't really bother me, and I prefer to keep this cluster a bit smaller than the one on the right for balance. For some final finishing touches, I was deciding between the pressed flower motif and the gold floral accents. Both would be beautiful, but I'm leaning towards the gold because of all the gold detailing in the ceiling of the church. I like placing them in groups of 3, tucking them in and around the leaves and flowers, or using them to fill in little bare spots. It really comes down to personal preference. Where I place them also depends on the clusters and the overall look I am trying to achieve. Before I wrap up, I made 2 more small changes that I want to point out. I added 1 more leaf to the top cluster. It was feeling a little too centered above the photo, and by tucking in that extra piece, the space feels more balanced and it's no longer lined up perfectly with the center of the photo, which I didn't love. You know, those little things that can really bug us sometimes. Here's a close-up so you can see the second little detail. I used a splatter stamp from the Elements of Text stamp set to add just a few subtle ink splatters around the clusters. I tucked a few dimensionals behind parts of the flowers for a bit of lift and subtle dimension without adding any bulk. Normally, I love to add word sentiments or little phrases around my clusters to help tell the story, but for this layout, I felt like it didn't need it. Everything feels complete on its own, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. So in this case, less is more. Let's take one more look at the sketch. I have to say, I followed it fairly closely. I did adjust the photo sizes a bit, adding 3 embellishment clusters. I kept the title in the same spot and moved the journaling over to the open area on the right. I found this sketch in an old Creating Keepsakes magazine, and it was designed by April Mazin. I've been working through a summer sketch challenge I talked about in an earlier video, and I'll link that at the end of this one if you'd like to check that out. This is the layout I made last month using the same sketch. I did end up making a few small changes after I filmed this video. I liked the sentiment I had originally chosen for the title, but I used a small stamp and I just felt like it was too small for the space I had it in. I recreated the exact same title using my Cricut, just made it larger to better fit the area. I did add a 1-inch strip of the old olive pattern paper over top. I repeated the same green pattern on the left side, placing a small strip over the transition between the pattern paper and the white cardstock. And then on the right, I added a 1/4-inch strip of black cardstock over that transition just to give more contrast and to finish things off. And that's going to do it for today's layout. I hope this gave you some inspiration for using sketches more than once. It's always amazing to see how different a 12 by 12 layout can look just by changing up your papers, photo sizes, and embellishments. I also really enjoyed working with the Gallery 6x6 paper collection, and even though it's a smaller format, it can absolutely be stretched to work beautifully across a full double 12 by 12 spread. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps more people find my channel, and I'm working hard to grow this creative little space. I'd love to have you subscribe if you haven't already, and feel free to leave a comment below. Have you ever reused a sketch and ended up with something completely different? For still shots of this layout and others, head over to my Instagram. Here's that video I mentioned to watch next. Thanks again for being here. Let's keep telling our stories one page at a time. Until next time, happy crafting.